Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my absolutely unhinged neighbor claimed that he owned my property and he tried to build a road right through the middle of my land. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the story. Oh my lord, that's what I said after dealing with a crazy neighbor who thought that my land was their land. Let me give you a little background information. I'd been living overseas in Slovakia for the past year and always frequented the countryside. I loved the sprawling hills, deep forests and lush greenery when you got outside of Bratislava. And Bratislava is basically the capital of Slovakia. Anyway, I was bored of the USA and wanted to leave. And my family had been farmers and the evil corporations took control of our land and used it as collateral to buy my other neighbors' land and put them out of business. It was devastating, so I just moved to Slovakia. I love it here. The people are nice, the air is clean, and I love the beer. When I went on road trips outside the city, I always imagined I would get back into the farming business and grow crops, raise cattle, and use the land for sustainability purposes. Maybe even start my own brewery. Little did I know that I was in a rock and a hard place with one of my neighbors. Hell, before I even bought the land, I had no idea this crazy neighbor even existed. Until that one day. So let me tell you, it was a disaster. I had finally purchased the land and well into the year I had good crops and my cattle was amazing. I loved walking through my farm property and reminiscing of the good old days of farming with my family in the US. Being single and a farmer was tough, not gonna lie. I had met lots of local farmers in the area doing great things and they all mentioned that my land was a prized possession and that I should take care of it at all costs. One day when I was out tending my cattle and my sheep, I hear this strange noise. It happened to be a drone flying over my property. It goes from one end of the property line to the other and then back again. I thought this is the strangest thing ever, who the hell is flying this thing? While heading back to Bratislava one day for a weekend out in the city, I love me some good beer, I get this random text message with an aerial photo of my property. The creepy thing that most disturbed me was that I was in the photo, and in the message it said, "You better get off my property before I do some real damage." I thought to myself, maybe they've gotten the wrong person, and why on earth would they think this is their property to begin with? I had the deed and all, I owned it outright and clear. Anyway, a few weeks go by and I get another text. I had no idea how this person had found my phone number. Maybe they looked up my property and did a cross-reference search with my name using the deed. Any other way, I keep getting these random creepy texts with photos of my house, my cattle, and more of me walking my property. At one point, I go outside when I saw the drone flying over again and waved at it to see if they could see me. Maybe it was a live video. At one point, I even gave it the middle finger hoping they would see me and take a photo of it. I went inside my house after that time and sat on my couch. I began to stew. And then I hear this knock on my door. It was a courier delivering a package. I opened it and inside were all these legal documents and handwritten letters claiming that my neighbor owned my land. What the hell? They even wrote up a document that said, "We'll be taking our land back by force by due process of the law if arrangements have not been made by such and such date." I threw the letters down and went outside. The air was stale and crisp and I could hardly breathe. I started sweating, then I get in my Land Rover and drive to the other end of the property. Through the trees I look at my neighbor's property. There are cattle, sheep and a large patch of land used for hay. It was similar to my own. Why the hell would they want my property and claim it is theirs when they got their own? I was standing there motionless, just taking it all in, and my heart sank. I felt like I was being swindled. It felt similar to America and how my family's land was essentially stolen right out from under us. And in my anger and sadness, I see out of the corner of my eye a faint flicker of light and movement in the bushes in the distance. There was a man standing there with binoculars in his hand. He was burly, with a shaved head and a thick beard. My heart almost jumped out of my chest when I noticed him. He stood there staring at me and took the binoculars and made two fingers, pointed them at his eyes and then back at me. He was trying to say that he had his eyes on me and I got a little nervous. "Hello?" I yelled, but I don't think he heard me. When I turned around to go and grab my phone out of the Rover, he was gone. But when I looked at my messages, there was another one. It read, "I got eyes watching you. Next time I see you on my property, something you love might just be taken away." I then got back into the Rover and drove back home. When I went inside, I picked up the letters and documents from this would-be terrorizer. My peace was gone. I did not know what to do or even think. Was this some sort of prophecy of my demise? Was I really doomed to not farm ever again? The next day I woke up from a hangover laying on the couch. The beer stains had seeped in my shirt and gotten all over the carpet. I was awakened by a loud noise. I couldn't quite make out what it was, and when I went to change and wash my face, I noticed that outside my window a very large vehicle was moving across my property. And no, it was not my Land Rover. It was a giant road roller making its way across my crops and straight for my cattle. What the hell? I put on my shirt and boots and quickly jumped outside, flagging them down. They would not stop, they just kept on rolling. I raced towards my barn and grabbed a pitchfork. I did not have a gun, so this was my only weapon in case things got heated. And sure enough they did. I ran towards the road roller and noticed that it's a woman driving it. And in the distance there's this bearded man waving at her with an orange nylon flag. Like some sort of construction worker telling her where to drive. I start waving at the woman, screaming at her, "What's your deal? Get the hell off my property!" The woman speeds up and starts rolling over crops. She even breaks down my wooden fence that I built to keep in the sheep. They all run out and she almost plows through them all. I get furious and run in front of her, waving like a madman, trying to get her to stop. When I realize she's not going to, I throw the pitchfork at her and it gets crushed as she rolls over it. She keeps going though. I keep yelling and screaming, "What the hell? Get out of here!" Finally, she stops near the trees at my property line. By now I am frantic, trying to figure out what to do. I grab my cell phone and call the cops, but there's no response. I try again and again until finally they answer. I give them all the info, but they are completely backed up and no officer can come out right now. I told them it's an emergency and that this crazy lady, who just might be my neighbor, is plowing through my farm, destroying everything. And that's when I realized something. Just as my family had been all alone in trying to fight for the farm back home, I too had to go do it alone. I had to find a way to get this menace off my property, and first thing was to sabotage this behemoth and not let them destroy any more of my property. So I race to my barn and grab my air compressor. I notice out of the corner of my eye the bearded man and the woman start talking and pointing at the trees. It's high time that I end this. So I devised a plan to stop them. I got the Rover, headed over to the other side of the trees. I knew what they were doing. They were trying to build a road through my property and cut down these trees. The bearded man had a chainsaw and an axe. I drive around the trees to this area where I know their property nearly connects to mine via a road. I knew this would be a prime spot for them to demolish it and connect the two roads. I hear the woman and man talking loudly in the distance. I could not quite make out what they were saying, but it was just enough to know their plans. They were heading straight for me. I grabbed the air compressor and a few rocks. I knew that there was a ditch with a big hole right before the road. I went and hit the air compressor in the hole and placed leaves over it to hide it. I heard them talking more loudly now. "Make sure you chop down that area." And I don't know where he's at. The next thing I hear is the road roller starting up and its engine revved. This was gonna be insane, but I only had one shot. I race back to my Rover and drive over to the man and woman. "Who the hell are you and what are you doing here?" I said. "This is my property and I demand that you leave now. I've called the police." The bearded man looked at me and grins. "Not in my backyard. This ain't anyone's property but ours, and you picked the wrong day." "Who the hell do you think you are?" the man said. "I'm the owner of this property, that's who I am, and you need to leave right this minute," I yelled back. The man stared at me with that creepy stare I saw the other day. He walks up to me and yells, "Make me." And out of his mouth comes a bunch of gibberish. I don't even know what he's saying. He motions to the woman to start rolling again, and I get in his face and say, "Wait, stop right now, you cannot do this, you need to leave right now." "Hey!" He keeps waving on the woman and she begins to roll ahead, and I am in his face all red and about to punch his lights out. The woman was going in a different direction from where I planted the air compressor. I thought, great, this isn't gonna work. I need her to steer the other way, this is my last hope. So I get back in the man's face and start yelling, "You've gotta stop her, that's my family buried over there in that tree area. You cannot run over a burial ground." He looks at me for a second and mumbles something under his breath. Then, as if by some miracle, my plan worked. He gets the woman to go the other way, towards the air compressor. With my fingers crossed and head spinning, I was on pins and needles just hoping that she would run over that air compressor. And by the way, ripe stars, I had to look up why OP would use an air compressor in this situation, but apparently, if an air compressor gets destroyed under the correct circumstances, it causes quite the massive explosion. And it can be very destructive, at least according to the YouTube videos I saw. Anyway, after going the other way, she was heading straight for it. The bearded man walks away and says, "Didn't you check your mail? This is our property. We can do whatever the hell we want with it." And just before he finishes his next sentence, I hear this giant explosion coming from the road roller. She hit the air compressor. Debris is flying everywhere. The woman is still on the road roller, not injured. It worked. It destroyed the engine and she couldn't start it anymore. I let out a huge sigh of relief. The man runs towards the woman. "What was that?" I heard them speak. "I don't know. I think it was something in the ground." The police then finally showed up after many attempts at trying to get a hold of them. By the time they got there though, my neighbors had fled and disappeared. I was trying to wrangle my sheep into a makeshift pen and could not chase after them to see if it was truly my next door neighbors. It turned out that it was them though. I looked them up and did a background check search. The man with the beard popped up in one of the searches. The police came out again the next day and did an extensive investigation. I hired a lawyer to take action and to investigate the property lines. The local officials came out and examined my property. I had the original inspector also come out with the original documents that had my claim to the land. These people were toast. Eventually my neighbors were arrested and it turned out that they had worked with a local official in forging property documents laying claim to my own land. The local government even hired a surveyor to come out as well. They wrote up documents and court papers proving that it was indeed my land. They fired the corrupt officials and my neighbors got arrested, and I went on with my life peacefully the days and weeks following that incident. I was relieved. Since my neighbors were in jail, they were forced to sell their land by the government and I laid claim and bought their property. It even came with sheep and goats and some crops that they couldn't harvest the following year because they were rotting in jail. The best thing too was that I was able to take their harvest and the gains from that land, build another barn and start my own brewery. The local government fined them heavily and they were never able to farm again. Oh my lord. And yeah, ripe stars, I'm so happy for this positive ending for OP and I hope he can now farm in peace. Let's hope that these entitled neighbors will never return again. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Adoption. It's something that I knew I would partake in from the age of 15. Whenever anyone mentioned my future and having kids, that is where my mind would go. To adoption. When I was 25, I met Josie. We met at work, both of us working for Google, me a software developer and her an intern. Sparks flew immediately and before we knew it, a year had passed and we started dating and then another 4 years marriage. And then, when we were 3 years into our marriage, we adopted a baby boy who we named Chris. Before the adoption, we moved into a new neighborhood and got out a mortgage on a very nice house. Both of us had many promotions with Google by this point and could afford to live rather luxuriously. Said neighborhood, as we discovered, had a very strict homeowners association group. The woman who was the president of the group lived on the other side of the neighborhood and from the get-go, we began having our issues. "Hi, I'm here to welcome you to the neighborhood," she spoke in a cheery tone as I opened the door to greet her for the first time. "Let's call her Karen. You will see why." "Oh, thank you. I've just moved here with my partner," I replied, happily accepting the pecan pie she was holding, excited to have such friendly neighbors. "I would also like to give you this. It's just the guidelines that we all stick to, just to ensure our neighborhood looks lovely." She handed me a flyer with HOA on it. It's a common thing over here that neighborhoods have these, so this was not much of a concern to me, and I did have a feeling they would have one, considering how neat and tidy all of the other houses are. "Once we've finished unpacking, we'll be sure to get started on the garden work," I said with a smile as I read the first page about the front lawn, the grass height and flowers, etc. "Thanks so much. Is your husband home?" she asked. "Oh, no, I don't have a husband," I replied. "Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. Cohabitation of non-married couples is becoming the norm, is it not?" She smiled, clearly not getting what I meant. But she did when Josie came to the door saying, "Who is it?" "You two are not married, are you?" Karen replied with a shaky voice. "We are. Is that gonna be an issue?" I stared at her as she began widening her eyes. Probably. You're kinda always causing issues, saying we are not woke enough or something. There should be a rule in there prohibiting this. She poked the flyer as she said that last part, and then turned and stormed off, turning her head around as she did so. And that grass better be cut when I next see you. Me and Josie shared a look as if to say, oh no. All I could hope was that the rest of the neighborhood were not at all like her. I told Josie about the rest of the conversation and how she was perfectly sweet before learning that we were lesbians. It was not difficult to figure out that she was a homophobe a couple of months into moving in, and Chris was finally able to come home. We had never been more happy than the day he was officially ours and in our arms. The months leading up to it were occasionally uncomfortable with Karen. For a while she would find every little thing she could pick on and make it our issue. The flowers are not tall enough, read the handbook. The paint is peeling, read the handbook. You're too loud at night, read the handbook. The last one made no sense because the night in question was a night we were not even home. She might have well just said, no lesbians, read the handbook. Even still, we didn't want trouble, so we smiled and nodded and just let her be. She eventually calmed down after a while, but when she got news that we now had a baby boy, things changed. We assume one of our other neighbors told her in one of their meetings, and probably not in a malicious way. All of the other neighbors have been nothing but, well, neighborly since we arrived. The first time she called around after hearing the news was with the police. Karen, what's going on? Why is the police here? I asked, shocked and angry at the smirk on her face. We just want to ask you a few questions. We hear you have a new baby, one of the officers asked, and my face paled as I realized what she had done. It's kidnapped, sir. They are gay. They cannot have a baby. Karen spoke up, feigning terror. We adopted him, thank you very much, I remarked. Before anyone could reply, we let the officers inside so they could see our adoption paperwork. Not you though, I stated to Karen as she began putting her foot through the door. She pulled a sour face, which I simply shut the door on. Not even 10 minutes later, and everything was cleared up. The police went on their way, leaving a very angry Karen on our doorstep. That poor child needs a mother and a father, Karen tutted before storming off once more, kicking over a gnome on the grass. Me and Josie went inside to talk about what had happened. Both of us were in quite a state afterwards. It was not a nice experience to have someone questioning your family, as I'm sure you can imagine. Is everything okay over here? I heard through the door and opened it to reveal the sweet old lady who lived next door. We let her in and explained everything that had happened. She had watched the encounter from her window. She was easily the nicest neighbor we ever had and loved to come around to fuss over Chris. She even offered to babysit whenever, which was handy when we both worked late and couldn't pick him up from nursery. For the next couple of weeks, Karen kept calling around saying anything and everything that was homophobic or just plain ignorant of our situation. We never thought she would go this far. However, one Monday, we dropped off Chris at kindergarten/nursery and everything felt normal. We ended up having to stay late at work because the office was doing some migration to a different processor and all hands on deck were needed to secure the files. We rang the lady who lived next door and asked if she could collect Chris and watch him for a few hours. She was delighted to hear that and said she would go straight away. But half an hour later, we got another call. He's not here, she yelled down the phone. They are saying he's gone missing. What? I have shouted on the phone. Miss, you need to get her straight away. We're not sure what has happened. He hasn't been counted back in from playing outside. Nobody else has come to collect him. One of the caregivers picked up the phone to say this. I barely even heard the rest as me and Josie had already ran out of the building and into our car. I nearly crashed multiple times on the way. The only thing I could think about was our sweet boy and what danger he was in. If you're a parent, I'm sure you will understand the feeling of pure terror as the possibilities of what happened swarm around your head like a wasp nest. Once we got there, the police had already been called and a search party was out. Is there anyone you know would take him? The police asked. I was crying hysterically and that's when Josie suddenly spoke up. Yes, she looked at me and I knew straight away who she was referring to. We all raced to Karen's house, us in the police car as they knew we were not fit to drive. Our neighbor, bless her, was so worked up she had convinced herself that it was her fault and if only she had gotten there a few minutes earlier. We of course assured her the best we could that it was not her fault and resent her we would not. We heard it, the crying of a baby. The police barged through the door and stormed all over the house until we found Karen huddled in a chair with our baby boy in her lap. I felt so relieved that we had found him, it could have been so much worse. Slowly hand us the child, the officer demanded, placing his gun on the floor. I'm his real mother. These two horrible women flew from England where we all lived with my baby. They are only living here to avoid jail time. Karen sounded hysterical and it was at this point when a teenage boy came downstairs. "Mom, what's going on here?" he asked, eyeing the baby. "You already have a son. Why do you want ours?" I demanded. "He's not yours," she began. "Mom, this has to stop. You've been obsessed with them for too long. I don't even recognize you anymore. Give them back their baby." The son looked in a mix between anger, hurt, and confusion. Karen loosened her hold on the baby as she stared down at her son with a guilty expression. The police quickly snatched Chris and handed him to us. Karen stayed silent as handcuffs were placed on her wrists and she was led into a cop car. We watched as she drove off. Her son also went with them. She ended up getting 15 years for kidnapping a child, and of course she got a permanent restraining order on us too, plus our baby, and she would never be allowed to step foot in this neighborhood again. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.